Frankie, thank you for that introduction. And let me just point out that I love all kinds of crazy shit, so I don't want, if this gets back home, okay, I just need to cover myself there. I'm very happy to be here. I'd like to thank Anthony, Rachel, and David Griffin for doing all of the organization that they have done to get me here. And I love Leeds. I loved it last year. I love it this year. I'd like to thank all of you for coming. As Frankie mentioned, I originally planned to do a presentation having to do with my previous historical work, which is becoming a trilogy. One day it'll be a trilogy, UFOs and the National Security State. I'll tell you a little bit about my background on this if you don't know. Sometimes it's interesting to hear. Back in the early, mid-90s, I knew absolutely nothing about the UFO topic. Had an average level of interest, maybe like most people. I didn't give it a lot of thought. In fact, I was at a bookstore, I think it was in 1994, and I saw a copy of Tim Good's Above Top Secret on a display at a store. I'd never seen it before, I'd never heard of it. And the subtitle of that book, as many of you know, is The Worldwide UFO Cover-Up. At that time, I was doing a lot of intensive study of U.S. Cold War history, circa 1950, national security strategy. I remember flipping through that book thinking, wow, this is a pretty good book. Looks like it's well researched. Names that I recognized, departments that I'd studied. But here he was putting them in a totally different context from anything that you get in conventional academia, that's for sure. They don't do flying saucers in graduate school. I bought the book. I thought this is a very good book, and I was hooked. Actually, obsessed is probably a better word for it. And I distinctly remember thinking, all I want to do is a personal little research project. I wasn't thinking of writing a book. I thought, I'll take a couple of months out of my life and really dig into this and decide, what do I think about UFOs? Everyone stumbles across this topic at some point in their life, and you hear claims of conspiracy, cover-up. I wasn't averse to looking into that. I didn't have an opinion much one way or the other on this. But I would say after a few months, I became very persuaded that there was something there. There was a there. And I think for me, it was a lot of government documents that I discovered were legitimate. They didn't individually prove that UFOs were ET or alien, but they did cumulatively prove that there was a phenomenon that existed that wasn't supposed to exist, that jet pilots and interceptors went after, that were taken seriously by the United States and UK and other militaries back in the 40s and 50s. And I discovered further that, analysts asked all the logical questions that we would ask today. Question number one is, were these Soviet craft playing games in our airspace? This was, as I discovered in a lot of the documents, it was legitimately asked, and it's a logical thing to ask. But guess what? There's no evidence that the Soviets invented flying saucers that could stop, zigzag, violate sensitive airspace, and then when an interceptor comes by, they just, zip off. I discovered the famous memo, famous among researchers, by U.S. General Nathan Twining. And Nathan Twining, in 1947, was head of what was called Air Material Command at Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio, what later became Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, U.S. Air Force headquarters. Twining later became a four-star general and chief of staff of the United States Air Force. So here he was in 1947, responding to an inquiry by another American general. And this general had said, essentially, are these so-called flying saucers anything that I have to worry about? What are they? Twining wrote this 3-page memo back. It's very detailed. You can read it. It's on the web. Saying the phenomenon the reported phenomenon is real, not visionary or fictitious. And then he goes on to describe many of the qualities of these objects as were coming in through military channels. Qualities such as evasive upon being sighted, silent or nearly silent, extreme maneuverability. The best one was the visual description, which was domed on top, flat on bottom. So ask yourself, what in 1947 could be domed on top and flat on bottom, or today for that matter? So whatever the solution to these were, whether it's, as some people now like to say, Nazi technology, taken after the war, or something more exotic, whatever that answer is. See, the thing that got me was that there was something that was very important here that warranted my attention. And so ever since then, I've been hooked, absolutely hooked. And I truly cannot foresee that I would ever really want to leave this topic permanently, or even for a long time. It just keeps pulling me back. I'm not even saying that I love it. Sometimes I hate it, but I'm connected to it in such a way that it's part of my life. For many years, I did not really discuss things like disclosure, or at least I tried not to. I didn't discuss things like exopolitics, or at least I, again, tried to stay away from it. But the problem is, because I write the things that I do, people often have associated me, at least in a tangential way, with some of these issues. And the fact is, I am interested in them. I'm interested in what the world would look like if UFO secrecy ever were to end. I'm interested in thinking about what would cause UFO secrecy to end. And issues like this got me to thinking for a number of years about how I perceive the actual structure of power in this world. Well, I was going to time myself, but this is an accurate clock, isn't it? So I can just, okay, good. So really, for the last couple of years, I've been really looking at things like the black budget and special access programs and all of this. And that's led to the topic that I want to go over with you today. I would have to say, the last couple of books that I wrote each took about 5 years to do. You can accuse me of a lot of things, but you can't accuse me of rushing through my research. So, but over the last year, I became very good friends with a gentleman who, in fact, was a television producer. He created and produced the American TV show Dark Skies. Some of you, I'm sure, are familiar with it. His name is Bryce Zabel. He lives out in California. Earlier in 2010, we just started chatting on a regular basis. He wanted to do maybe a project dealing with UFOs in the national security state. Over our conversations, we decided, maybe we'll do that, but what we really want to do is this other project. He's maybe a TV guy, but he's a very serious student of this topic, as I am, and as I'm sure many of you are. So one thing led to another, and we decided to do this book. The book is done, really. It's final stages. I'm publishing it. It'll be available this fall. So I don't want to... It's not that I'm here to plug the book. What I want to do is discuss the themes, because I think that they're interesting, and I hope that you think that they're interesting. So let me get into that. The one thing that I will say is I'm an advocate for ending secrecy. I do believe that the secrecy on this topic has been fundamental to a lot of the problems that we see elsewhere in the world. I believe, for example, that secrecy on UFOs is one of the key creators of what we would now call the black budget world. And so ending secrecy is going to be a very difficult ride. It won't be fun in a lot of ways, because there's a lot of vested interest in keeping it that way. I think we can all see. And nevertheless, it has to happen. And I hope to explain to you why. I look at this as the irresistible force versus the immovable object. The irresistible force is the phenomenon itself. It won't go away, no matter how many times the the powers that be tell us there's nothing there, you know, it keeps showing up. So whoever's in charge of it, they don't get the memo that they're not supposed to exist. The immovable object, though, is the secrecy itself. It's a structure that has proven to be far more labyrinthian, far more formidable than I think even people back in the 1950s and 60s ever conceived. And so we've got these two very powerful forces here. And what we've seen in the last more than half century is this really titanic struggle. I really believe that a century from now, when this phase of our history is done, people will look back and they will see this will be like Clash of the Titans. Sometimes it's hard for us to appreciate because we get very little media attention. But this is a very, very significant thing going on. I would also suggest that the structure of secrecy has twisted our society in a way. You know, I live in America, where I've seen my country lie to itself about a whole bunch of things, about what its role in the world is. And I don't blame the people of the United States because they're subjected to a 24/7 propaganda barrage, and what are they supposed to think half the time? But what happens to a society when you lie to yourself constantly? I mean, it does bad things to you. So it's like a person who's addicted to a drug, and you try to tell them, you know, you got to get off of this, and they say, leave me alone, get off of my back. That's America. Maybe that's Britain. It's definitely America. But it's not just lies about the war. It's not just lies about things that America does. There's the UFO lie has done bad things to the soul of the world. Think about it. When you've got this big reality of these, whoever these beings are, whatever they are, they have technology that is so vastly beyond what we're supposed to have. And yet we tell ourselves every single day that this doesn't exist. There's a dissonance there, a cognitive dissonance. And, you know, I'll leave it to some other scholars and intellectuals to really look at the implications of that. But there's a lot to be seen there. So it's easy to argue that the secrecy is never going to end. I get this all the time. I've got all my Facebook friends now, and everyone wants to tell me why the secrecy on this is just going to go forever. It's easy to make the case, honestly, because, you know, we've been trying now. People have been trying for a long time, and the structure's still in place. But the attempts that have been made over the years have not been a complete wash. And let me go over a little bit of that with you. A little bit of history before we move to the future. The 1940s, every decade of the modern post-war World War II era has seen a kind of crisis in the phenomenon and in the maintenance of the secret itself. We had it in the 1940s. 1947, of course, the year of Roswell, the year that flying saucers emerged into the consciousness of the United States and really the world. Yes, there were Foo Fighters. Yes, there were ghost rockets. They didn't really have the impact that flying saucers had. What we know, of course, is that in 47 and 48, within the U.S. military structure, that this hit very hard. And there were reports that were made. In the summer of 48, there was a report that landed on the desk of the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, Hoyt Vandenberg. It was called the Estimate of the Situation. And the estimate was that the UFOs were interplanetary. That's the word that they liked to use at that time. So in other words, there were Air Force analysts at that time, some of whom who concluded that this was not something that we were making. Vandenberg said, I don't like the conclusion, get me something else, and he actually broke that group up, and those people were reassigned. Now, there was no organized movement in the 1940s by citizens to get to the bottom of this. People trusted their government, right? World War II had just ended. Americans were very gung-ho about their political leadership, that's for sure. They trusted the government. Why shouldn't they, we thought, right? The party line in the 40s, it's really not too different from the party line today. The United States Air Force issued a press release. All evidence and analysis indicate that reports of these are the result of misinterpretation of conventional objects, a mild form of mass hysteria or war nerves. We don't hear that one too much anymore. Hoaxers and psychopathological persons. Many statements through this period just slam the whole topic, of course. Throw cold water over it. There's nothing to see here. Keep moving along, people. The 1950s, we have the beginnings of a citizen movement in the U.S. to challenge UFO secrecy, mostly in the form of an organization called NICAP. The leader of NICAP was this gentleman pictured here, Donald Kehoe, retired Marine Corps major, friend of Charles Lindbergh. They did challenge the government line. Their whole attitude was to work within the system. In other words, they weren't like what we would say today. Like they wouldn't be 9/11 analysts among this. These people were very patriotic. They believed that their government was on the side of justice. They just believed that the policy of secrecy was misguided. People like Kehoe said, look, people really can handle this. And as free people in a progressive world, we really should know. And that was basically the attitude. There was a pragmatic attitude as well, which NICAP tried to push. I think it was very politically astute. It didn't work. But the argument was, these UFOs, which you keep telling the military are a bunch of nonsense, are real. And if you mistake these UFOs for Soviet missiles, boom, there's World War III. This was an argument that they brought up. I don't really think it's a valid argument because I have no doubt that within the very classified world, they knew full well that the UFOs were something to take into account. But nonetheless, in a public forum, it was a pretty good argument. But the whole idea of the 1950s is a consensus culture. They said, let's work within the system. There were a couple of times when NICAP was this close to apparently getting congressional hearings on this topic, open congressional hearings, and every time at the 11th hour, something happened to prevent that. In the 1960s, this really came to a head in the U.S., which, at least in the public realm, I still feel at that time was where really the action was. Lots of sightings, so much so that it got the attention of the U.S. Congress, so much so that even future President Congressman Gerald R. Ford spoke about this on behalf of his constituents. And he said, I'm really not happy with the answers the Air Force is giving me. We need to get to the bottom of it. This is a pretty serious statement. Ford, who was absolutely a member of, I think, the inner circle. He was a member of the Warren Commission, for example, that investigated the Kennedy assassination, that covered up the Kennedy assassination. But nonetheless, here's Ford now talking about UFOs. So what happened? The Air Force is very clever here. You should never underestimate the United States Air Force public relations capabilities. All right, NICAP's plan to get congressional hearings looked like it might happen. And this is something the U.S. Air Force absolutely did not want. So what they did is they took the initiative. They hired the University of Colorado to do a study. And of course they rigged the game because they had the guy in charge, Edward Condon, who's pictured on the bottom, making, this is his little flying saucer thing. It's a big, big joke. They knew exactly what they were getting. And, the Colorado study, which they commissioned, was filled with mutiny and dissension. Scientists who legitimately wanted to investigate this and discovered that Condon and his assistant, former CIA agent Robert Lowe, were never going to allow a positive conclusion to come out. And they were fired midway through. It was a messy project. Got the job done, though. No matter how messy it was, they issued the report, which in fact had many, many, many unidentified sightings within it. None of it mattered. Condon wrote the conclusion saying there's nothing to this. Air Force should drop the Project Blue Book. And that's exactly what happened. So the establishment was absolutely victorious, or so it seemed. What happened? Yeah, and then there's the conclusion. Nothing has come from the study of UFOs that is added to scientific knowledge, so just drop it. But, you can't banish these things. They don't go away. And not only that, excuse me. I'm ever so slightly under the weather. I'm hanging in there. Crazy. I was feeling great earlier, but what happened in the 70s is, life goes on. You can't stop time. You can't stop people from continuing to investigate this. And ufology, the study of UFOs, regrouped. In the U.S., what happened? Vietnam kind of became this big crisis. Watergate happened. U.S. Congress reasserted its own authority. They passed the Freedom of Information Act, among other things. A New Hope, just like in Star Wars, A New Hope. Well, A New Hope in ufology, FOIA. It was an unforeseen development from the 50s and 60s. But what it meant was that by the late 1970s, documents that had been classified with every expectation that they would remain classified suddenly were being declassified. And a lot of the UFO groups started petitioning the government for UFO-related documents. And suddenly, to the surprise of some people, not hundreds, but thousands of pages of pretty good UFO reports were being made available from the FBI, from the Defense Intelligence Agency, from the CIA, from the NSA, although those are all blacked out, and from all other agencies. So here's the FBI, for example, which had said for years, but we don't really investigate UFOs, but suddenly that was proven to be absolutely untrue. And so it looked like the Freedom of Information Act would accomplish what the Condon Committee had sort of squashed. That is, that if you shake the tree hard enough, the right document might fall out, proving once and for all that this is real. Well, in fact, what they did is they did prove that there was a cover-up. There's no question about it. I subtitled Volume 2 of my study of UFOs in the national security state, The Cover-Up Exposed. And the reason I did that is because it's absolutely the case that in the 70s and 80s, that cover-up was exposed, definitively. It wasn't ended, but it was exposed. It was proven beyond any doubt that there were classified documents that took the UFO phenomenon very seriously. Now, you'd think in a logical world that that would be enough to get an admission from the powers that be, but of course, well, that didn't quite happen. At the same time as the Freedom of Information avenue, there was one other avenue that was very significant in this phenomenon and ending the secrecy, and that was the leaks. Today we call all these people whistleblowers. I think, by the way, that's a very overblown and inappropriate term in many cases for people who I don't think are particularly truthful or verifiable. All right. Some, yeah, okay. A lot of them, I'm not convinced, personally. Nonetheless, though, in the 70s and 80s, there were a lot of leaks that came quietly to researchers. And a lot of these leaks dealt with retrieval of exotic technology, i.e. crashed UFOs. The Roswell case, for example, was resurrected at this time. But not only Roswell, a lot of other cases. And claims, a widow would come up to a researcher and say, my husband, before he died, told me of an assignment that he had at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base where he guarded dead alien bodies, for instance. Or another case where a researcher cultivated a medical doctor who had described to him how he had done an autopsy of an alien being. Things like this. Now, they're not confirmable, but it did look like there was a lot of smoke, and maybe some of that smoke signified fire. And so you've got these two avenues, the leaks and the Freedom of Information Act documents, and it looked like, boom, something might happen. Well, it didn't happen. Why didn't it? My own argument is that, well, it looked like there was a counterattack. That's how I interpret it. U.S. intelligence stirred the pot, muddied up the waters, put out what I think we can call some disinformation. And disinformation, I wouldn't say is the same as lies. It's not the same as a hoax. I mean, really, it's not effective disinformation if it's all fake, because then you can just identify it. Disinformation is effective if it's got truth in it, but truth in such a way that it's not credible or plausible. And this is what I think happened with the MJ-12 documents, which my own opinion is that there is a lot of compelling information in those documents. I am not someone who just says they're a hoax, let's throw them away. But I'm also a little bit careful, I'm cautious about them. But it remains that they're not confirmable. They don't have a provenance. And so what it's meant is that for the last 25 years, what UFO researchers have done is argue with each other until they're blue in the face and no one can agree. Gee, effective tactic. So this, I think, was one of the things that happened. But still, again, life goes on. It doesn't stop. The 1980s, we get more leaks. And by the way, under Ronald Reagan, Freedom of Information Act was restricted. Reagan issued an executive order in 1982 that took the wind out of the sails of freedom of information. Didn't nullify it exactly, but it made it very user-unfriendly and very expensive. And so the golden era really ended at that time. But lots of other leaks occurred. Everyone's heard of Bob Lazar, talked about Area 51. Robert Sarbacher, a retired defense scientist, was another very important leak at this time. Another gentleman, Dr. Eric Walker, also very important. I wrote about all of these in my second volume of history. You can certainly look at those. The point is that it did look again in the 1980s, especially toward the middle and late 80s, that something might happen. There might be a leak from the inside that would blow this secrecy wide open. It didn't happen. 1990s, we get more initiatives. The Lawrence Rockefeller Initiative, the Roswell Initiative, all of this in the early 1990s, especially with the coming of Bill Clinton to the White House. Again, researchers thought, we have an opportunity here. Let's make things happen. Stephen Greer got into the mix, and he became a very interesting player in all of this. Here's Stephen Greer, not yet 40 years old, and he has a meeting with the director of the CIA. How'd you like to do that? I would. I'd love to be able to do that, chat with the head of the CIA about UFOs. It did happen. In 1997, and this is something that I researched independently, Stephen Greer and Dr. Edgar Mitchell, the astronaut, had a meeting with U.S. Admiral Thomas Wilson. Wilson at the time was head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. They met with Wilson. I spoke to Thomas Wilson. I really annoyed him extremely, but I did get him to admit he did meet with these two men. They did talk about deep, black, clandestine, ET-related programs. Wilson said it was poppycock. That was actually the word he used. Who says poppycock? But Thomas Wilson did. He got very upset with me, and he hung up the phone, actually. But the fact was that he met with them. Edgar Mitchell said to me that Wilson was quite interested, and he said he would look into it. I had another source, independent from either of those, who knew about this, and told me point blank, and I think that I trust this source. He was in a position to know a few things. He said to me that Wilson tried and failed to gain access to these programs. He learned where they were, knocked on enough doors, got an answer. The only reason anyone would speak to him was because they wanted to find out how he learned about the program. This man was head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs, but not apparently someone with a need to know. So what it shows us, this is all during the 90s, well, it shows us that this secret's getting a little bit out of control. But nonetheless, like I say, life goes on. What did we get in the 1990s? The Internet, really, finally. And the Internet was another unforeseen development in our society. I think it's fair to say that in 1985, no one expected that there would be this crazy thing that would allow people to just instantly put their thoughts out into cyber world for anybody with a modem to read. The whole field of UFO studies, like so much else, just exploded. All the old conservative publications, which had their own submission policies and restricted, really, very restricted sort of thing, that went all away. Because suddenly now anyone could get into the mix, for better and for worse. So the world was really changing a lot. The weakening of the old major UFO organizations, I think, happened in the 90s. And then in our own century now, the revolution, the technological revolution continues. What we're seeing, events like this, all right, where people get together, they put together a conference, they put their research out there. In certain cases, they get press coverage. Steve Bassett, who's here, has organized every year, for years now, events at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. Some of them have gotten mainstream media attention, some more than others. Stephen Greer, I think in 2001, had the real granddaddy of all of these. A lot of press coverage. I think that was a mixed bag in some ways, but it was a very major event. So we've come a long way in how we sort of attack the secrecy on this. And nonetheless, if you were to inquire with the United States Air Force about UFOs, this is what they would tell you. From 1947 to 1969, the Air Force investigated UFOs under Project Blue Book. The decision to discontinue UFO investigations was based on an evaluation of a report prepared by the University of Colorado. As a result, the conclusions of Project Blue Book were a whole lot of nothing. Okay? No evidence of ET, yada, yada, yada. And we're out, people. We're out of UFOs. We don't investigate anymore. That's the Air Force. So really, exactly the same type of attitude that you got in the 40s and 50s. Nothing's changed, even though everything's changed. So, if you look at all of the history, you think, well, hell, you're just slamming yourself into a stone wall year after year. Why bother? You'll never succeed. But that's wrong to think that. That's absolutely wrong. Time does not stop. This is not the world of 1950. It's certainly not the world of 1900. A world, you think about the course of human history. 100 years ago, our whole civilization was horses pulling carts. That was the world. And in a century, we get, well, all of this. Cars and planes and atomic bombs and computers and guided missiles and lasers, fiber optics. We're a generation, maybe, from computers that will be smarter than us. I tell people, if you think UFOs are a bit whack, well, read some books on the future of AI. Okay? Those are mainstream authors. They get a lot of funding to do their work. I wish I got that kind of funding. They are supported. They have a lot of serious people listening to them. And pretty much all of them say that the day is going to come when your computer is going to be talking to you. Except for the fact that it's going to be able to do cogitation that we can't do. More than just beating you in a game of chess. They'll actually be able to really think and reason. One of the phrases by Ray Kurzweil, one of the leaders in this school of thought, he uses the phrase godlike intelligence. Okay, so get it. All right, and that could be within the lifetime of most of us who are here. Then you've got developments in the future for nanotech, which are going to be off the charts by our standards today. Quantum computing, I can't even figure that one out. But it's on the way, possibly, probably. And so, in other words, what we're doing is, in the blink of a cosmic eye, we've reinvented ourselves, not just as a society or as a civilization, but very probably about to do so as a species. Because really, when you think about the future of biotech, we've now mapped the human genome. Do you really think we're going to just, look at the human genome and say, okay, we're not going to manipulate things? Of course they're going to do that. We're a species of Frankenstein. So we're going to play games with the human genome. We're going to probably put little nanobots in there. Who knows what we're going to look like in 100 years? So that's who we are. In that context, can we really think that our knowledge, our public knowledge of this topic is going to stay as it is right now? To me, that's idiocy to think so. Now, I don't know what the trigger is going to be, but I know something's going to give here. Because we're not going to look the way we do even in 50 years as we do today. So something fundamental. We have to expect that there are going to be fundamental changes. So let me move on to how I think this will happen. Hopefully it won't be like this, or like V, you know, in the new TV series. That would really suck. I personally would not be a happy camper if we had an Independence Day scenario. I actually think that won't be how the secret breaks. Could it be that someone gets lucky with their camcorder? Dave Griffin, who gave a really excellent talk just before me, talked about the night vision revolution. I think he's right on with this. One of those images is a night vision shot, as you can see there. And here I have a slide saying a new technology. And what I mean by this is, again, the internet is 20 years old. Smartphones are, 5 years old, I guess. YouTube is 5 years old. You think about that. YouTube is 5 years old. That's it. It hasn't existed forever. Okay, so what new developments are we going to be looking at in another 5 years that connect us all in terms of communication? Who knows? Night vision. You know, the day is going to come when that is going to be a lot more affordable. So there are a lot of possibilities here that are going to allow us to interact with this phenomenon, record it, and what will it be? Maybe it'll be night vision. Maybe it'll be something else that we're not even thinking of right now. Okay? So that's a little bit of prologue as to why I think something's going to give. I'd like to spend the rest of this lecture trying to explain what I think is going to happen, or at least what I think is possibly going to happen, what may happen. There's a lot of ways that this secret can end. You know, I mentioned a civilian lab obtaining wreckage or an artifact. You know, this has actually happened, and of course, it's all a matter of getting the word out about your research. But again, just because we've met with failure in the past doesn't mean that we're always going to meet with failure. It's like in a sporting event, you know, and you're not going to get a goal every single time you kick the ball, but if you do it enough times, you're going to score. It could be that a new crash occurs, these things do go down, and maybe some group other than the military will get there first. It's possible. Declassification or announcement by some government other than the big bad U.S., well, I wonder about this. I think it's a possibility. We do live in a world with a number of centers of power. Now, of course, there are the guys behind the scenes. I'll talk about them in a minute. But, you know, I think it's also safe to say that we don't live in the most stable political situation. So there are powers, there are competitions going on there. A public confession. Actually, there's been a lot of those. A lot of generals and other sundry big shots who've made statements about the reality of UFOs. But let's say someone of the stature of, I don't know, Colin Powell says, yeah, you know, here's the truth. Is it impossible? No, I don't think it's impossible at all. Not at all. Investigative journalism. Well, try not to laugh here. But it's possible that this can happen. My friend and colleague, Leslie Kane, journalist in the United States, has just published an excellent book dealing with this topic, putting together a very, very strong case of leading public officials, aviators, and so on, who have made very detailed statements on the reality of UFOs. Look, if you get enough of these people doing good work, don't think that it can't have an impact. It can have an impact. The field needs good, solid research at every opportunity. My own personal guess for the trigger event for forcing a disclosure might be some kind of mass sighting. We're almost at the point now where everyone's going to have little HD flip cameras. They're already becoming very common. And they're cheap. And they're very good quality. You know, the videos that most phones have today, I think, are really not very good quality. But that is going to change in the next few years. So what impact will that bring? Well, very likely something. So I could easily envision a scenario something along the lines of maybe the Phoenix Lights or Stephenville, Texas, something like that, where this time everyone's got the little HD flip cameras. And suddenly it becomes more and more difficult, increasingly difficult, to deny these things. Or the others themselves. I call them the others, at least currently. I don't like the word alien. I don't even like the word extraterrestrial. I don't know who these people are. I've been thinking about this a lot. When I got into this game years ago, I think I developed the assumption, probably like a lot of people, that they probably, people from another planet. I don't rule this out. I still think the ET explanation is a very compelling one. But let's face it, there's a lot of possibilities here. So for the sake of argument today, I'm calling them the others. But it's possible that these others, who have been intentionally, I think, secretive all these years, maybe they will do something. So let's just, play a little game here and look into the future and say that there's some kind of event that happens. And people see this, and it becomes something that is a real problem. If you're the President of the United States, or the Prime Minister of the UK, if it happens here, or any other national leader. So then what do? That's the problem. Well, there is a group that's like Majestic, that's my opinion. That is, there is a group that has been managing this for a long time. So what would they do? Well, I think they would debate the matter, and they would probably have this long discussion about it. A lot of them would probably vote, they would vote no in terms of telling the public what's going on. The world has too many problems already. If we tell the world what's going on here, we're going to have serious government gridlock, for starters. By the way, people don't care anyway. They've had us handle this for them for all these years. Why rock the boat? The public's right to know is not an absolute guarantee. That's an argument that is being made. And then even a more serious one, I think, would be, once we come out with this, where's our credibility? We've got a real problem here, because suddenly 6-7 decades of lies are going to become very evident. Telling the truth leads to unpredictable results, and there's no such thing as a little bit of disclosure. You can't be a little bit pregnant, right? You can't. You're going to have a very difficult time if you disclose this much. Very difficult time, as I'll get back into that in a moment. There's a lot more no reasons. I heard this suggested. I don't know that it's true, but it made me wonder, if you acknowledge the reality of these others, are we inviting them into our world in greater numbers? Some people have argued this. It's possible that people will react so negatively in such a hostile manner that we will be compelled to act aggressively and trigger a hostile response. It might be argued that we need more time to develop effective weapons systems. And then the economic argument. The economy is, based on the status quo. Are we going to trigger another Great Depression? Particularly if the answer to this has something to do with petroleum, which I guarantee you it's going to affect petroleum in a big way. We have a world in which the oil people own it all. Our whole global infrastructure relies on petroleum. And changing that will be disruptive. National unity will be weakened as people demand a global response. And then finally, we'll have to acknowledge our complicity in the abduction and mutilation phenomenon. Sure they would. And yet there might be the need to vote yes. For a lot of the arguments that I gave, you could really just counter it and say, well, the world has too many problems to ignore this any longer. You could say the public does have a right to know. We've had long enough to assess the situation. It's now time to act. Technologies that have been developed in secret can be unleashed for the betterment of humankind. People are more open to this reality than they once were. Following this major new event, it's going to be very difficult to deny this in a credible manner. If we release some information now, we can control the spin on it rather than let this run wild. And then probably the thing that will do it is that the world already knows. I mean, if they get to that point, then they have to say something. So I can imagine, them speaking, saying, who's going to tell the president? And one of them may have that long walk to the White House and sit down with the president and say, all right, well, here's the deal, and you're going to have to tell the world A, B, and C. What would the president then say? Well, look, what if really think about this. If you were the president of the United States and you had to tell the world about this. It sounds great for us. We got to tell the secret. We got to let the world know. Would you want to be the person to do it? There's a lot going on here. You don't want to start global panic, which is a real possibility. You want to be able to maintain some semblance of smooth sailing for the foreseeable future. All right? You would want to do that. And so how do you do this? Well, if you believe that we're not in an immediate state of threat, you might say something like, I've been briefed. Yes, it has come to my attention. We are not alone. There are others who are here. There is no need to panic. We've got the situation under control. We will release information as it becomes responsible for us to do so. And you can try that tactic. Now, as a leader, you might decide that a little bit of fear is not a bad thing. Hey, the United States learned that it was a great thing after 9/11. Okay? So you might decide that you want to instill a little bit of fear. You don't want full-blown panic, perhaps, but you want to have people listen to you so you can control the situation. So you might say, we're under threat, but we have the capability to respond. We're consulting with other governments, and the military's got a plan. Something like that. Now, that's easy on the first day, maybe. All right? The world might give you a little bit of breathing room. But here's the problem with disclosure. It's true, you can't do just a little bit and expect to get away with it. This is the problem. So you have to ask yourself, how much disclosure? Can you even possibly do a full disclosure? I would suggest you can't. It's not possible. It's not possible to give a full disclosure. Again, if you're the president, where do you get all your data from? You think the NSA is just going to say, here's everything in one day, 24 hours. We got everything for you right here. Here's the book. I don't think it works like that. This stuff is compartmented, deeply, deeply secret, and it's probably not really even fully government. All right? I've been suggesting for a couple of years now, my own opinion, that much of this has gone private, so to speak. Look, this is certainly the case with conventional elements of military. U.S. policy in the Middle East is so obviously a tool of multinational, international financial groups. I mean, how hard is this to see that they control so much policy? This is how governments everywhere are. They're owned by the people with the money. And so it's very possible that within a lot of the military, so-called, or intelligence community files, they actually may not have all the answers. These might be at Lockheed. They might be at Raytheon. They might be at Boeing. They might be at General Electric. And getting to this information might not be all that easy, considering that stuff is not classified, but rather proprietary. But nonetheless, even within the intelligence community, it's very likely that you're not going to be able to get access to all this all at once. And so you can't do a full disclosure. You might think it's a great idea to do it because the possibility might be that if you just dump all the information out there, thousands of pages of documents and CDs and DVDs and all of this, that it would be so much that people would be overwhelmed, and then you might actually be able to control the media spin very effectively. I think this happens. The MOD is great at it. Sorry, with all due apologies to my good friend Nick Pope, I think that a lot of these MOD releases, frankly, are very overblown. As Tim Good pointed out in an interview that was shown here earlier, these documents are really not truly top secret documents. They're letters, typically, that come in. I'm not saying they aren't important. They're significant, okay? But what happened, and this also happened when the CIA released the so-called family jewels. Within the history of the CIA, is kind of a big thing back in the 70s. All the plans to assassinate all the foreign leaders, from Castro to Patrice Lumumba and so forth. CIA finally dumps it all out. Well, I remember I did an interview on Coast to Coast that night, and I was asked to comment on it. And I printed off the whole damn thing. And I looked it through. It was a whole lot of nothing. You know, it looked really impressive, and it was very disappointing. A lot of stuff was whited out and duplicated documents. And so, you know, the idea is, though, but by pretending to release all this information, you can control the spin. So that might be a possibility here. But really, I think what you'd want to do is this partial disclosure, like I described, which Bryce, my co-author, and I call it death by 1,000 cuts, but it's still probably a more attractive scenario than the full, because you actually might have a better chance even then at spin control. I could even foresee the possibility that in a post-disclosure scenario that the ruling powers would try to downplay previous UFO sightings. I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that they would just say, yeah, it's actually true, all those UFO sightings are actually happening. They might say a couple are, but most are, people still haven't gotten it right. I could easily see this being the case. Now, the real problem with any disclosure is going to be, well, where are these aliens? We've got to see them. You're going to have a whole scientific community that's not going to believe any of this until they actually have tangible data or something physical to study. And what if you're not able to produce that, like an actual alien being? Probably wouldn't. So you'd have to produce something else that would be persuasive. The public's going to want to see images. They're going to want to see artifacts. They're going to want to see bodies of deceased ETs, probably. That will be required. And if that's not produced, it's going to be very difficult to build a consensus among the world population. Many people are going to believe this is all a ruse of some sort. So, again, this is a political relations nightmare for any president. And it really would require someone of rock-solid psychological stability and foresight and vision to guide this world successfully through this transition. It's not always easy to find these people. The military certainly is going to be on high alert around the world. You can guarantee this. Once this announcement is made, there's going to be, if for no other reason than to guard against riots and revolution in one's own country. But certainly they would probably be on alert in the event, well, if we make a disclosure, what are these others going to do? So the military is going to be triggered at a high level. Martial law, yeah, I think I had an image here, and it's not showing up. Bummer. I had a really cool martial law image. Oh, well, you have to take my word for it, I guess. I think we can expect it to be declared, maybe here, maybe in the UK, maybe in the United States, maybe in parts of the United States, maybe in entire regions of the world. I mean, yeah, it's a convenient excuse if you're interested in declaring martial law and managing your population. But, of course, it really could be that the greatest threat at this time would be from people going crazy. And so we're going to have, and again, I had another image behind all of this. None of them came through. I'm sorry about that. Well, anyway, who cares? The media. Which in Richard D. Hall's outstanding presentation earlier today, as he pointed out, and I think we all really know, major media has been hand in glove with the major intelligence organizations for years. In the U.S., this is old news. Of course, It's not old news because most people still don't know it. But if you go to any public library, you can read all about this. This is not controversial. How the CIA has been very, very close with the New York Times, Washington Post, CBS, NBC, all the major networks. How Carl Bernstein of Watergate fame did an expose back in the 70s, for God's sake, about how the CIA had hundreds of American journalists on their payroll without anybody knowing. But there you have it. Think what you could do personally if you had 400 journalists covertly working for you. Really. Okay? Could you control the news completely? Maybe not. Could you manage spin? Could you kill off stories? Could you promote certain stories? Yes. That's what they do. That's what goes on at BBC. British, UK news establishment is so obviously, to me, a tool of the intelligence community, especially regarding UFOs. I mean, every damn year they more the Chinese lantern stories. What is up with this? I did an interview yesterday for, no, this morning. I get my days mixed up. I was with BBC Leeds. And it was nice, and the host was, he was good on the radio. And like out of the blue, I'm here talking about the conference, and he says, well, what about those Chinese lanterns? And I said, are you kidding me? He said, well, they can be Chinese lanterns, can't they? I said, can they? Really? I didn't put up with that, I'll tell you right now. But they're compulsive. It's a compulsion. Dealing with Rendlesham. Do you remember the case a couple of years ago, the guy the American service guy who left his car lights on, and that was supposed to be the Rendlesham case. And now this BS artist with the fertilizer, there's bullshit for you in more ways than one. And I can't even keep up with all of the debunkery that comes out of the UK news establishment. It's a laugh, except for the fact that they seem to be, they're effective enough in that what they do is they disable. It's a continually disabling effect of this topic. And you may read a particular story and think, oh, well, that's silly. But they hit you again and again with it. I think it's an effective tactic. And so that's not going to stop after some big shot tells you that other beings are here. It's not like MI5 is just going to go away or the CIA is just going to go away. So they've wanted to control this all the time. They're going to continue to try to control this. So we have to expect that. I guarantee you the media is not going to look at themselves at all as complicit. They're going to start pointing fingers, except at themselves. But you have to wonder how long that will succeed as well. So in other words, the thing I would say about the media is just because someone important makes an announcement doesn't mean that what we get after that is going to be at all truthful. It's going to be up to any of us who really care about this to be very, very critically minded and to continue to monitor this situation. So now after the initial shock and awe of this, that's, I think, where the real battle is going to be taking place. It's really not all that different from the battle that we're facing right now in the world over information. What do we have? Today we've got a battle in which, well, the forces of a global police state want to get inside your head. They want to control what you think. And then there are the forces on the other side of the fence. People who actually are out there fighting for free information out on the internet. That's the battlefield. That's not going to stop after disclosure. So it'll be a battle for control over spin on this topic. Here's some of the questions that are going to be raised. There'll be others, but I think these are some pretty good ones. People are going to want to know. I'm going to be asking, how have you kept this secret all these years? How have you kept a secret like this for almost 70 years? And by asking that question, and I'm sure I won't be the only one, it's going to lead to some very uncomfortable issues about the structure of secrecy, which I have argued for many years is inherently illegal. Even if you can justify it in terms of a perceived threat, is literally unconstitutional by U.S. law and unconstitutional probably by the laws of other nations. What is the structure of UFO secrecy? Well, again, I think there's very good reason to suggest that this is a secret that's gone beyond formal government control. I'll give you one example. I spoke to a retired senior U.S. Air Force officer less than 2 years ago who has got a PhD. He's a nice guy. He told me of a deathbed confession that he got from a man who was laying in a very secure facility. And this elderly gentleman had handled Roswell wreckage. The retired officer said to me that after chatting with this gentleman, he was convinced that the man's story checked out, that he really was what he claimed, and so on. And the bottom line of this was he said to this ill man that he said, it's a shame that you can't tell the world your story. It's a shame that you've got this security oath that you've taken. Wouldn't it be nice if a presidential executive order were to liberate you from your oath? And to that, this man, dying in his bed, said, it would take a hell of a lot more than a presidential executive order to liberate me from my oath. Okay. At that point, I asked this officer, well, what are we talking about here? He says, well, something bigger than the president. I said, like what, like the Bilderberg Group, something like that? He said, yeah, something like that, I think. So maybe that's what we're dealing with, a group behind the structure, the formal structure of power. And again, I would say this is not hard to really grasp. I know the U.S. politics better than I know UK politics, but I can say very confidently in the United States that every person who becomes president is lifted up and dropped into that White House by very, very powerful financial interests, and they decide who's going in. Whether it's, it's certainly without question in the modern period that I've just been reviewing, Gerald R. Ford. Who thinks of Gerald Ford, 5-time attendee of the Bilderberg Group meetings in the 60s? To Jimmy Carter, who was dropped into office by David Rockefeller, whose national security advisor became Rockefeller's close friend Zbigniew Brzezinski. Reagan, Bush, Clinton, Bush Jr., Obama, all of these people. They're allowed to become president. So that, I think, is very possibly going to come out. Questions that you can only hide this for so long. Then people are going to ask, well, what's the status of our secret technology? Because we've been hearing all these rumors about our homemade flying saucers, which I think we do have, by the way. People will want to know about that. That's not going to be fun to talk about. Are people being abducted? That's really not going to be fun to talk about. Because people are being abducted. The question is who's doing it. And then, of course, get down to real brass tacks. Who are these other beings? Do we have anything to worry about? What do they want? Are we safe? And you as the president, or you as the prime minister, or you as the leader of your nation, you may have to answer these questions. And you're going to have to be very careful about how you... In other words, you probably wouldn't be able to be truthful. I mean, really. They have my sympathy. I wouldn't want to be in their position. But the fact is that these questions will not be easy to dodge, even for a little while. Well, let's ask who they are. So who are they? Are they extraterrestrial? Are they dimensional? Are they the Atlanteans? Seriously, I used to laugh about this. I don't know it anymore. There are some real mysteries in our ancient history, in my own opinion. Is it possible that there's a lost, very advanced, covert human group that's developed, gotten access to some really neat secrets? They live separate from us. Well, okay, maybe. Are they intelligent machines of some sort? I've been thinking about this one for a long time. I believe that they are probably intelligent machines, even if there's a number of scenarios that can be true. I think that intelligent machines are part of this mix. And when we think of machines, let's keep in mind, they don't have to be metal. They could be biological. They could be artificial organisms. Again, we are, in our own civilization, pretty close to making such things. So I think we can assume, like the Greys, for example, could be extraterrestrial and intelligent machines. Or they could be homegrown intelligent machines. Are they what we would traditionally call angels and demons? Maybe. Maybe they are. I think there's a lot of possibilities here that we should consider. Are they time travelers? Again, or is there some combination of all of these? And it's not for me here to answer that because, I don't really know. And I think that there's a couple of combinations that could be possible as well. Let's talk about their intentions. It's quite possible that they don't really want a lot to do with us. They're just here observing us. It's a possibility. And that their interventions are limited in our civilization. I'm not of that opinion for the most part. I think that we are actually being intervened with in some way. But it's possible that maybe some of them want little to do with us because, let's face it, there might be more than one group. I'm not sure if I put this in the slideshow, but I do think that we are currently probably the most interesting show in this quadrant of the galaxy, just by virtue of what we're doing right now. We're probably attracting a lot of interesting people from all over the place. So let's look at what's going to happen on Earth. They're about to leap into our world. Let's watch them carefully, unless they fall off their tightrope into oblivion, if they have infrastructure collapse. So I have a feeling that we're very interesting to them. And there are reasons to think that at least some of them are peaceful, or at least we're not in their cookbook. They might be actually looking out for us. Certainly there are a number of individuals who have claimed to have had communications with these other beings. And I'm not here to dismiss that. The problem with these claims, of course, as we all know, is that you can't verify them very easily. You've got to take people at their word. But there are a lot of people. They're psychologically normal. And some of the accounts, I think, are plausible. And so, yes, I think that some of these beings are interested in at least not screwing us over too bad. I would say that there are some instances where we would be very likely to believe otherwise. Frankie Ma earlier mentioned that I have 2 children. They're now 14 and almost 12. I can tell you I wouldn't want to leave them alone in a room with some of these creatures from what we've learned, or what I think that is the case in some of the literature and the research. I would also add, not that I'm some great conduit from the clandestine world, but I've had people talk to me that I am quite persuaded know a few things. And I've had reason to believe that, some of these other beings are scary. And so if they really are dark, scary, let us even say demonic, some people might say, what if that were true? Well, you'd have a pretty good reason to understand why there might be some secrecy on this. What do they want? Do they want our DNA? I think the answer is yes. Just judging by abduction accounts, they seem to be interested in that aspect of us. They seem to be interested in creating what we might call hybrids. Yeah. Why would they be interested in that? Are they trying to live here? I would say the answer is maybe. Sure, why wouldn't they? I mean, if you were an extraterrestrial, let's say, and you're here on Earth, you probably can't just walk around on the surface of the planet. I mean, there's a lot of problems there. There's microbes, there's solar radiation, there's people. So it might be a real hassle for you. You might, for a while, create a nice, secure place deep underground where you wouldn't have to worry about that. And then you might have your people, so to speak, kind of infiltrate the top side. And you might do some genetic tweaking. I could see that. Do they want our bodies? Do they want our souls? I realize not everyone believes in the soul. I think that I do. I'm pretty sure that I believe in it, not because I want to. I think that we have one. Are they interested in that? Well, sometimes you read these things in the literature. I don't know. But if I were an intelligence officer charged with studying this, I can tell you I would be interested in all of these possibilities. And I have to assume that there are people in that world who are interested in these. Are they interested in our world? Again, I would say it would be foolish to rule this out. I have a really hard time with some researchers who say the following. We know they're peaceful because they would have blown us up by now. I mean, we've all heard this. And I think, what? I mean, if I wanted to take over a world, first of all, I wouldn't blow it up. I wouldn't want to lay waste to the whole ecosystem. I'd want to preserve it, because that's why I came here. So I might have a problem with the local chiefdom of humanity, but if I want to wipe them out, it might not be the easiest thing to do for a lot of reasons. So I might have to have a long-range plan. Why is this so difficult to understand? What if they have an infinite amount of patience compared with us? We have no patience. But what if they have a lot? What if they don't care if it takes 1,000 years to ease us out? Well then, okay. So are they interested in our world? Well, if they're creating hybrids, maybe the answer to that is yes. Maybe it is. Now, in the last couple of years, I've put out a theory. It's my own little bright idea. I call it a breakaway civilization. I wrote about this in the second volume of my history. And we've written a little bit more about it in AD. Think of this. All right, let's pretend that all of us are part of the classified, the deep classified world. The deep, deep, deep. And we've had this alien artifact, to study for all these years. And for a long time, maybe we can't figure it out, but we've got a lot of people here with IQs of 200, let's say, and eventually we start really making breakthroughs. And we might think, well, we can't duplicate all of the properties of this, but I just figured out a way to create fiber optics or, radically improve our integrated circuits or whatever, high tensile fibers, lasers. Okay. So certainly, some of these you'd want to segue off into the private corporate world to make money. Nice ground floor investment opportunities. Yes, absolutely. But here, what if some of the ideas you have are so important that you really can't share? Like, I don't know, anti-gravity, super longevity. Would you really want to share that with the great unwashed out there? You might not, especially if the whole world of petroleum economy and petrodollars comes crashing down with anti-grav. No, you might think, let's just wait here a little bit. And we'll work on this one alone. And so what you then do is you develop your own classified scientific infrastructure. And the next thing you know, maybe you're doing leapfrogging here. Because really, what does science do? It builds on itself. And so boom, 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 boom. The next thing you know, we're like over here, and all the rest of the people are still way over here. And maybe these developments allow you to interact in some way with these others. So now you're developing a new cosmology, a new vision of the world and of the universe and of our place in it, and everyone else is over there. Well, I think of that as a different civilization. I mean, you've got a different view of the universe, you've got a different basic technology, an invisible empire, which is really all that I've just been saying here. Look, in human civilization, in human history, rather, we've had multiple separate civilizations that have coexisted. You go back 500 years. You got Western Europe, Eastern Europe, you've got North Africa, you got the Near East, you got China, you got the Western Hemisphere, all separate. And really the story of the last 500 years has been how they've, increasingly, we've become a global village. But what's to say that we can't have a separate civilization? Nothing at all. And I think this is, in fact, what's happened. Now, I'm not part of the club, so I can't really tell you how it all works out. But this is what I think happens. I think very likely they live there and they live here. You know, they have family, they've got relatives. It's not like they just go off and, like in, what was that movie? Plan 3. What was that one from the...
Plan 9 from Outer Space.
Not Plan 9 from Outer Space, no.
Alternative 3.
Alternative 3, right. Where they go off to... I mean, maybe that is the case too, but I think what's more likely is that, you know, they go to work for some contractor, not even for the NSA or NRO or MI5, but some contractor probably, and then they spend their day, or maybe a few days, or maybe a few weeks doing whatever they do here, and they come back and they meet their neighbors and they have Christmas and everything else. I think that's very likely how it works out. I would say that breakaway group, breakaway civilization, very likely has a lot of money, a lot of independence of action, and independence from the established system of power. So I mention them in this context because I think it's very likely that in the aftermath of a disclosure that we might learn about them. And one reason I think we might learn about them is because people will talk about them. People like myself, but maybe others. Maybe some of them will come out of the woodwork. Leaks. You know, one of the reasons that there were a lot of leaks in the late 70s was because people thought that the presidency of Jimmy Carter was going to allow for a breaking in the secrecy. Didn't really happen, but it did prompt a lot of the leaks. And it would be the same here, I think, with an announcement. A lot of people would come out. One of the things that we've speculated about in this book is the great panic of year one. Empty shelves, people buying all the rolls of toilet paper and food, cans of baked beans, you know, all of that stuff. Just scarf it right off the shelf. It could really be that there will be a logistics breakdown, distribution problems. I could see that. Guns and ammo sales in the U.S. will go way up, guaranteed. Looting and riots, yes. Well, look, it's not going to happen forever. You know, that doesn't go on forever. It can happen. I think it's likely to happen in various parts of the world. Wow, I'm going really... Well, it's a good thing I got 2 hours this time. I'm notorious for going over. But usually that's when I'm allotted 90 minutes, not 2 hours. So I think we'll be okay. There's going to be a lot of embarrassment from the major, you know, institutions of society. Government. Okay. People are going to see government as having lost their credibility. They've lied all these years. Military. Can't protect the citizens. And also, obviously, very culpable in hiding the truth. Journalists will be widely seen as having missed the greatest story of our lifetimes. Science, I'm going to come back to science in a minute, will be seen, at least the scientific establishment, not science itself, as scientists as unwilling or unable to see the obvious. It's like the Pope refusing to look through Galileo's telescope. And that's what's going to happen with scientists. Educators, they won't have it so bad, but they're going to have a lot of textbooks to rewrite, starting immediately, because, you know, frankly, the whole modern history is going to have to be re-understood in the context of this great truth. Religion. What's going to happen with religion? You know, it's very common, I think, for analysts to say religion is going to break down. I hear this all the time. Turns out that a lot of those analysts are themselves non-religious or non-spiritual or atheists, and they all predict that people who have various faiths are just going to go pull their hair out of their head and run around in circles. Well, it turns out there's been a number of pretty good studies and polls done for people regarding their faith and a disclosure event. This is something that we bring out in our book. Turns out that at least if you were to talk to these people of very strong faith, they don't think that they're going to fall apart. And I do think it's very likely. What one of the most fascinating elements of the post-disclosure world will be how all the major religions of the world adapt to this. Some will adapt better than others. You know, in my country, There's a very, very strong evangelical kind of Southern Baptist strain, and I'm certain that this will be interpreted in a very scary way. These entities will be interpreted as demonic. In the Bible, Lucifer is the prince of the air, prince of powers of air, principalities of the air. This is all going to be interpreted biblically, and very likely in a hostile way. That's going to be one part. There'll be other religions that are going to just become very interesting. Falun Gong in China. All right, if you've followed this at all, that's a fascinating belief system. Started in the early 1990s. You know what they believe? They believe that ETs are inhabiting you, some of you, and some of you not, that they're taking over. Well, whether that's true or not, you can bet that that's a belief system that's going to take off in a post-disclosure world. The Mormons are going to have a field day because I've got Mormon friends, and this is really true, and I don't mean to say this as a way of belittling them, but they are of the opinion that when they die, they inherit a kingdom, a world, and by which many of them interpret as literally a planet. The Mormon faith, in other words, believes very explicitly in extraterrestrial life. And they'll have an interesting way to interpret this. The Vatican has, of course, been increasingly over the last few years been making statements that are very suggestive of a belief in extraterrestrial life, and one wonders what might come out of the Vatican in a post-disclosure world, and so on. Islamic religion may have a problem, may not have a problem. Belief in extraterrestrial worlds is not against the Islamic creed. It's really not a fundamental part of that creed. But it is true that in the Quran, there is a statement about Allah as ruler of many worlds. And so, I think the various faiths, in other words, are very likely to incorporate this new reality maybe more successfully than some of us might think. The real issue, the real blowback, I've been kind of holding off of this till now, is going to have to do with economy and energy. So I think that's coming up now. Oh no, legal challenges. So I'll get back up to energy in a minute. Truth commissions, I say congressional investigations. I'm making this a little U.S. heavy, sorry. Legal action to obtain evidence, class action lawsuits. I mean, people have had abduction experiences. I think we can assume there's going to be a very significant class action lawsuit against somebody to get justice. When you really think about the number of people who've been traumatized, I mean messed up by what they are convinced are abduction experiences, suddenly it's going to be very difficult to deny that all these people who've seen little beings with large eyes, who've taken them and done things to them, it's going to be difficult to say, well, that's just a figment of your imagination. All right? So, and it's going to be very difficult for governments to avoid culpability. Maybe some governments will, but maybe not all. Defense contractor lawsuits. I spoke to one prominent inside gentleman who said to me explicitly that this is a concern. It sounds so prosaic. Defense contractor lawsuits. Well, let's say if I'm head of one defense contracting company and I'm competing against you, and you get a contract because, well, you have it in on the ET secret and some of this really fun technology to play with, and I never did, that's actionable. And I would very definitely institute a lawsuit. And so these are very prosaic but very messy issues. Can you sue the ETs themselves or arrest them? Well, maybe not. I know it does sound funny, but the thing is, legally speaking, there will be an entire legal field that's going to try to incorporate this. If there are these other beings, where do they stand in terms of law? It may not be easy to resolve this. They may not recognize our laws, right? So where does that make them? What does that make them in terms of legality? Now the economy. Immediate, I think we could expect the president to announce a freeze of the stock market and a bank freeze. He'd probably make the announcement, I think, on a Friday afternoon, seriously, after the market's about to close. That's when you make your statement. You give the world a chance to take a few deep breaths before you watch this market go on Monday morning. But maybe that would avoid, the delay might help things a little bit. There'll be panic selling. The real thing will be petroleum. What do you do about petroleum? This is the real problem because, look, whatever these things are using to fly, it's not petroleum. Now, we use petroleum for more than just transportation. We make plastics with it. But really, transportation and power are about 2/3 of the petroleum economy in the world. And so if you don't need it for that anymore, if they've got a better source of energy and a better way of moving about, that's a real problem because the entire global financial system is based on petroleum. I mean, all the energy that goes into making this little container, okay, most of the cost of this laptop here is tied into the amount of the cost of the energy that it took to produce it. All right, and to transport it. That's really where the cost is. So what if you've got now a source of energy that, is cheap and portable? Well, that's awesome, and we would all love that, except for the fact, unless you owned Exxon Mobil or BP. Of course, it may not be a BP at the time this all happened. Who knows? But these petroleum companies, who have a lot of power, are not going to be happy about this. And so that's a real issue. I think this has been a problem all along. Back in the 40s and 50s, there was one leak that came out, a woman whose father was involved in a crash retrieval. He told her that, he told her that a guy in charge of his group that was doing the cleanup said, there is no way that this is ever going to come out because it would end the oil industry. And I think it would severely damage it. It would transform the oil industry in such a way. And so we would think, well, that's great. We don't need them. And it is great in the long run. But in the short term, it's not going to be fun. All right? Because we're going to have to transition away from it. You can't do that overnight anyway. And so it's going to cause a lot of fluctuations in the financial markets. So I think that's something that we have to be ready to expect. There could be a light at the end of that tunnel. Now, the other thing about free or at least cheap portable energy is what would it do? It would create a lot of freedom in the world. It would be a real boon to us down in the long term, possibly. Of course, it could also allow someone in this room to blow up a country, for all I know. I mean, the energy that would allow you to heat your home forever for free might easily be converted into a really nifty bomb. I don't know. What if that's the case? So then you've got this whole issue of how do we control the process of this energy, and, that's just not easy. And that's another issue that has to be worked out. The devil is in the details, they say, and there's going to be a lot of devil in those details. I'm not saying we can't do it, but it's just an issue. Here's the thing. I was just chatting with someone earlier today about this, and so if you have this portable energy and now you can zip around the world, let's say. So what does that do to national boundaries? And what does that do to governments that want to control their populations? If you can just take your little thing and you're in Singapore in a half hour. If populations can truly move with ease in a world where energy is actually cheap and readily available. Again, it could be a great thing, or it could be a really dangerous thing. We might be able to save the environment. I'll get into that in a moment, but it might allow us to really trash the environment even worse. You might say we've had free energy for 150 years, called oil. I mean, it's not really free now, but it was free practically for a long time. Cheap, allowed us to do things we'd never been able to do. And what did we do? We scurried around the world like a bunch of termites eating everything up because we had the ability to do that. Now, the oil caused problems because it pollutes and so on, but it also just allowed us really to carve up the world a lot more easily. Will it necessarily be different with an even better, even cheaper form of energy? I guess the answer is maybe yes and maybe no. Would such free energy allow us to build a propulsive space drive and allow us to go off-world, like I think the breakaway group is already doing? And incidentally, I just want to comment on some of the earlier lectures regarding possibilities of off-world bases. I'm pretty much in line with what I've heard earlier today from these other speakers. I think that it is actually possible that there are such bases, even on Mars, although I put that as a likely outcome. I will tell you, I spoke to a gentleman about the moon one time. And this is a gentleman who is a very well-known person, who told me about, how do I put this, remote viewers at Fort Meade, Maryland in the early 1980s. It's the home of the NSA. Being tasked with remote viewing the far side of the moon. And I said to this gentleman, really? Well, now why would they do that? He said, why do you think? And I said, well, I suppose, are they looking for E.T.? He said, bingo. I said, did they find E.T.? He said, well, I don't really know. And maybe if I did, maybe I wouldn't feel that I could tell you anyway. But I actually don't know, he said. So if that's true, I think that he's certainly a very credible guy. So if it's true, then at the very least, our people have had very good reason to look at the far side of the moon for some reason, to think that there might be E.T. there. Do we have a base there? Well, if we have the ability to have anti-grav, we have the ability, now we know the moon's got a lot of water there, so now we can get oxygen, no problem. You can just do electrolysis, split the oxygen off from the water, boom, there you go. You can go back and forth, provision it. Maybe they do. Under the ground there. Secure environment. Possible. Anyway, the point is, if they're doing it, maybe we'll be able to do it. So I've kind of just discussed all of this. Oops. So I'm going to skip by. Who's going to build these devices to go off-world? The global economy is not going to stop. Is America going to build them? Is Britain going to build them? Is China going to build them? There'll be a lot of opportunities, I would assume, for global economic expansion. I think this really could be a very positive thing in the long term for global economy. I just think that the short term can be a very unstable situation. What did I write here? Portable energy implications. And here I had a really nice picture of green fields and flowers. And, I wanted you to see that. But, we can assume that the globe will have wider access to free energy, internet. Would we be able to sort of, to some extent, end our war against the environment because this source of energy would enable us not to have to extract resources like, a starving man eating his first bag of Cheetos in 5 years. I mean, maybe we would actually be able to mellow out and not destroy the environment in the way that we are. It's, I think, possible. Would some of these green solutions enable us to repair the environment? Desalinization of water. I think we're getting close to that anyway. And if we can actually have true desalinization, we literally could, as some people have said, make the deserts bloom. Maybe it would be a great thing. We could have a reduction of the carbon footprint in households, break down and treat waste products and really repair certain toxicities that exist in our world. Be easier to go underground because, look, if you have your own portable source of energy, you can then power your own digging tools. You can just go the hell underground as far as you want. That might be an attractive thing to do. Underground is more attractive than people realize. I just published a book by a very good friend of mine, the author Dr. Richard Sauter, called Hidden in Plain Sight. And I will say that Richard made a great case as to why it is possible that there is a deep, involved, let us say almost labyrinthian underground infrastructure, complete with maglev trains and large bases under the ground and even under the sea. If you think that's impossible, think again. Look, we've got the Channel Tunnel here that goes under the sea, right? So we've got the technology to do it. Why not have something under the floor of the Atlantic Ocean? Easier to go off-world, colonize the moon and Mars? Sure. With cheap portable energy, everything has changed. Everything is easier. What happens to war? What happens to war? Throughout our history, why do we have war? Well, we have war because we want to take that guy's stuff over there. Usually. Even the so-called religious wars, really. They're all about resources. What do you think Afghanistan's about? And now that trillions of dollars of minerals are found under the ground in Afghanistan, that war ain't going to end anytime soon. We can all be sure of that. Iraq, same thing. It's about taking other people's oil. So if you don't need to worry about that, we're going to lose a lot of the obvious justification for international war. And that could be a great thing. I think we could all easily see the transformation of these global militaries for other purposes, basically to control to control populations domestically. That's what a lot of them are used for anyway. The other thing is that, easy global travel, which I mentioned earlier in this talk, I think is very likely going to lead to a loss of provincialism over, say, a generation. I mean, people don't really change, but their children change. I have a somewhat cynical attitude about most of us, present company excluded, so that when you turn 30, your mind kind of turns to cement there, and you spend the rest of your life filling in the blanks of what you think you already know. I think 30 is the magic number for a lot of people, because you turn 30 and then you realize I can't pretend I'm a kid anymore. I got to straighten up and fly right, and I got to be responsible and think, And people they just kind of shut down. But their children, they don't share the attitude. So the next generation that grows up in a world where travel is very, very easy, I really do think that we're likely to see a decline in things like extreme religious fundamentalism of all types. I think that's a real possibility. Because it's cultural interactions that wear that stuff down like water wearing away a stone. So I think it's possible that with a disclosure, human warfare, human-to-human warfare, might, go away to some extent. I haven't gotten back into the others. I'll come back to them in a minute. Religions, I kind of talked about this already, so I'm going to blow past it. Although I would say that new religions are going to be a certainty. And it might be related to this pot. And here, I had a nice picture of Woodstock and people half naked doing crazy stuff. Why do I have that? Because I really think that we're very likely, think about this, to see a kind of revival in modern guise of the 1960s. Think of the parallels. Great shock that starts it off. The assassination of John F. Kennedy, the invention of disclosure, the draft, maybe martial law, an anti-establishment counterculture that says, don't trust those bastards, okay? In both cases. I think it's very likely to... New vistas of the mind. The 1960s really was about that. It was about a lot of things, but one was that it was a challenge of the old established belief systems. And everything was up for grabs in the 60s, or so it seemed. And I think everything is going to feel up for grabs in this new era. And then hallucinogens, LSD, break on through to the other side, break through the doors of perception, because that's where the real action is. And there were people who really talked about this. I got to meet Timothy Leary on 2 occasions. It's kind of neat for me. The guru of LSD, turn on, tune in, drop out. It's going to happen in this new world. Why? I can easily see a cult of ayahuasca developing. Why? Because that's a drug. It's legal in South America, by the way, so book your flight soon. I haven't tried it. Don't get the wrong idea. But people who have talked over and over. They say, I see there's beings there. You can see them. You open up that part of your mind. Now, whether that's actually the case or not is another issue. But you can bet that this will be a very, very big thing. And so, yeah, I think in a lot of ways we're primed in a post-disclosure world to see a kind of revival of the 60s. And for all of its great and nasty elements, I think it's very likely we're going to see things like that again. Science, how much time do I have? A little bit. Thank you. Science itself, the scientific community is going to be shocked. They're going to be upset. They'll be more traumatized, I think, than the religious folks. I really do. They're going to be traumatized because they have really missed this boat even more than religious leaders. They've had this assumption that we are at the pinnacle of intelligence on this world. And they're going to be freaked out in the sense of thinking, damn, what's their science? They're way ahead of us. We've got some catching up to do. And I think there will be a very significant loss of confidence, at least in the short term. But of course, the thing about science itself is not going to be damaged. Science itself is going to see a renaissance. Maybe that's not the right word, because I don't think that science is in the Middle Ages here. We've got some very interesting science in our world, but I think that it will be dramatically affected by this. I mean, think about some of the... did I write this down? Yes, I did. Okay, good. Biology, genetics, disease prevention. Because, look, within the classified world already, I believe, there have been breakthroughs in things like biotechnology. And even if there haven't, all right, people are going to understand that there have probably been autopsies of non-human extraterrestrial life forms, or whatever they are. And there might be really important things that we learn from that. All right? Consciousness and memory. Ask yourself this. How is it that abductions have been so successful? Well, they wipe memories. How do they wipe memories? We're going to be asking these questions. We're going to learn a lot about human memory. We're going to learn a lot about human consciousness in the aftermath of this, because we'll finally, after all these years, going to start asking the right questions. Gravity, unified physics, field theory of physics. Gravity is the one element in physics today that we don't really get. We don't truly understand gravity. And that's why we don't have a unified field theory. But these craft, they can deal with gravity in a way that we don't officially understand. It's very possible that by understanding that we make breakthroughs in this other area. Here's a question: where is the rest of the universe? Most of the universe is what we call dark matter and dark energy. I think something like 4%, less than 5% of the known universe is observable. Kind of a crazy idea, but that's true. So we call the rest of it dark because we can't see it. I don't know if we're going to get an answer to this from disclosure, but maybe we will. Maybe the others will throw us a bone, or maybe we'll just come up with some answers in our own analysis of the situation. And then, of course, right, we're going to ask ourselves, how do these other craft move around? Is it by zero-point energy some way? Is it through some another holy grail like controlled nuclear fusion? And keep in mind, nuclear fusion is different from nuclear power today. Nuclear power today is what's called fission. So you take the atom and you blast it apart. You get a lot of energy, but you get a lot of radiation. In fusion, that's actually not the case. Fusion, like a hydrogen bomb, is nuclear fusion. But that's not controlled fusion. That's kablamo. The holy grail of nuclear research is to have a controlled nuclear fusion, so that what you have is an enormous amount of energy, but that's clean. The byproduct of clean fusion is helium, which is inert. So if you get that, well, and I think it's very possible that we in the aftermath of disclosure, get some answers to that. I talk, every now and then about AI. I'm not an expert in artificial intelligence. I just read the books. But I'm interested in it. In AI theory, they talk about this thing called the singularity. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of it. Like in physics, the singularity of a black hole is the center of a black hole. It's the actual matter of a collapsed star. And it's in that, it's of, they say, virtual infinite density and almost no size, but it's like super, super heavy. And at the singularity of a black hole, all physics is screwy. It's not predictable, and we're not able to understand it. AI theorists use that same concept to describe what will happen when machine intelligence surpasses our own. And the reason they call it a singularity is that because we're not in control of the situation anymore. And so it's hard for us to predict what conscious, advanced machine intelligence will do. Will they pull a Matrix or a Terminator on us and say, oh, humanity, that? Or will they want to help us out? Who knows? We don't know. I think that there's a relationship between disclosure and the singularity. Earlier today, Richard D. Hall talked about 9/11 and disclosure, and he argued that disclosure will hinge on truth regarding 9/11. He may be right. I think that 9/11 and the UFO cover-up are really the two big lies of our current era. But I would also suggest that the singularity might really get into the mix. My guess is that disclosure will come shortly before the singularity. So in other words, as our own capabilities technologically improve, we come up with new ways of talking to each other, greater intelligence of our own computing capabilities, that we're going to get to a point where we then collectively say, oh, ET, UFO, interdimensional entities. Yeah, obviously. I don't really know how that may happen, but it could easily happen like that, in my view. The only caveat is that there are some AI theorists who put the singularity as farther ahead in the future, like maybe even a century. And I don't think that disclosure is going to take nearly that long. So it could be that we end up with a disclosure long before the singularity. I have 5 minutes. I'm just going to keep going. I'm sorry. You can leave if you want. This is important, at least to me. Getting toward the end here. Politics, New World Order, and disclosure. All right. The New World Order, it's coming. You can't do anything about it. We've had 500 years of making it. It's not like it just happened in the last 25 years. Okay? I mean, look, you go from Christopher Columbus, the Spaniards settling the New World, economic, financial entanglement of nations. It's not going to go away. What's happened is that we're developing a global system, like it or not. The question is going to come down to who is going to run it. Are you going to run it, or are the Rockefeller, Rothschild, Morgan dynasty, whoever, are they going to run it and give you a 24/7 mind job? And the other thing is that, well, let me keep going to this. If I were sitting across from, like, the guy making the decisions, like, if I really were to talk to Barack Obama, wouldn't that be neat? And I would say, well, here's what you have to do. All right? If you want to do this right, you got a choice. We can either have a disclosure in a fascist global state, or we can actually do it in a way that is in accordance with the ideals that probably every person has grown up with. A belief in freedom of choice, and belief in liberty. We can do this. How can we do it? We need a reasoned humanitarian policy by responsible people to bring a peaceful transition and a courageous confrontation of the truth. That's my policy statement. What does it mean? in the United States, which has become really what we've had is a silent coup that has expropriated the power of the presidency, in which the U.S. president has become, is a talking head, a sales rep. The U.S. president's a sales rep. And what he's got to sell me in my country are really two things. He's got to sell whatever new war comes down the pike, and he's got to sell globalization. A rather bitter pill for a lot of people to swallow, but that's what he does. But he doesn't have to be simply a tool of the global financial elite. It doesn't have to be. No one's forcing him. He could reclaim full constitutional authority in the name of the people. He could fight for a new formalized structure of power to be created to meet this challenge. Let's call it a global federalism. And rein in the culture of secrecy. Transition away from a petroleum-based society. Otherwise, we go down a very, very dark path. I call it a new federalism. Keep in mind, I'm from the States. We have a federal system. 200 plus years ago, in my country, we had these arguments, which resulted in a brilliant series of documents called the Federalist Papers. It was the great compromise of American history. And all of us are really fortunate that the people running the American Revolution were true visionaries. They had a real problem confronting themselves. After they get their independence from Britain, they had a real hard time running the country. They had a confederacy for a few years. And it was causing a lot of problems. Massachusetts had different tariff policies than Rhode Island. So Massachusetts had high tariffs, but Rhode Island had none, undercutting that whole thing. Different currencies, different relations. They were almost going to have different foreign policies. It was getting close. People said, this is not right. We're going to get picked apart by the European powers, and that would have happened. So you had people arguing for a centralized government. The problem with that is that the revolutionaries who just fought this war said, to hell with that. I'm not replacing one king with another over my dead body. And so how do you resolve this? So what they did was one of those amazing compromises in modern political history. They came up with a federal system, a stronger centralized government, but with a lot of power still residing in the states. And that was the original balance of power in the United States. State power has kind of gone by the boards. But that's how it was for a long while. And really, on a global scale, it's so obvious to me. That's what we need. We need, because right now we've got a system of these transnational, multinational corporations running around like the dog that gets to pee on everyone's tree. No one controls these. They're beyond nations. There's got to be a global system in place that is equal to the task of managing that. And I'm not saying it's easy. That global system could easily be dominated by the same interests that control the corporations. But the fact is, you've got to make the effort. I'm just about at the end here. Thank you for your patience. Them, these others. Who are they? I can't answer that. It's very possible, I believe it's probable, that the group I call Majestic is trying to deal with them. They may very well be trying to scramble right now because they may be outmatched by a situation in which a bunch of other intelligences are doing what they want to do on this planet. That might be the case. In a post-disclosure world, here's the great irony. We may be a little farther along in understanding what we're dealing with, and it's also possible that we are not as much farther along as we'd like to be. That's the problem. Disclosure announcement is not going to just end this situation, maybe not for a long time. Maybe not for a long time. I had a picture of my new book cover, but, you'll have to go to keyholepublishing.com or afterdisclosure.com to see that. I'd like to thank you very much for your patience. It's been wonderful to be here.
Thank you so much, Richard. That was absolutely brilliant, and it does make such a difference. A historian commenting on this issue.
Thank you.
Right, guys, do you want to do a Q&A quickly? Does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask? Yeah.
Are the ones keeping the secrets the ETs themselves? That's an excellent question. I think that they're participants in the secrecy. I probably should have made this a little more clear. Yes, I believe that. Whatever they're doing, they don't seem to be interested or desirous of us knowing that they have an agenda. And so, yes, it's an issue. It's not all a happy family here that we're dealing with. I have some sympathy after looking at this for the human secret keepers. I'm not saying that they're not culpable. I'm not saying that they're not grasping, avaricious individuals who want control. But it could really be that they see that they're dealing with a situation of these other beings that are here whose agenda may not coincide with our best interest. It's entirely possible. Question?
Yeah, you mentioned the Admiral Wilson story. I'd love to know if he couldn't get access. Do you think this lies mostly in the corporations, as you said, or do you think it's a war on the intelligence agencies? Who's got the grip on this issue?
That's a great question. If you didn't hear, David referred to the Admiral Thomas Wilson story I mentioned earlier, and Thomas Wilson was unable to gain access to the ET black budget secrets. Who's in charge is the question. I have what I think are reasons to believe that the true power is, I guess, what we would call quasi-government, quasi-private. Is the best way that I can put it, backed by an enormous amount of private money. I think I used to argue solely that all of this was funded by theft from, like, the black budget. I wouldn't argue against that. But I also actually now think that a lot of it comes from private money, lots of private money from these interests, and that they've got control over most of these special access programs. The Washington Post, which is useless for the most part, actually had a pretty good 3-part series recently on the U.S. intelligence community. One of the things that they talked about was the runaway nature of the U.S. intelligence community, but also the fact that that intel community, I've been saying this for years, is dominated by private interests. And we don't really know what these people do half the time. So I think what we've seen is a privatization of a lot of this secret, which is going to make it difficult to come out, but not impossible. Not impossible once there's some kind of disclosure.
Okay, and the final question from that lady there.
I was just going to ask you, when you were mentioning full disclosure and saying that we couldn't have full disclosure all at once, do you think it's possible that the government is already trying to disclose these things through the media with films such as Avatar?
Great question. Now, I'll repeat it if someone in the back didn't hear. The idea about full disclosure, do I think that the government or governments are trying to implement some kind of full disclosure through media? This is an excellent question. I think it's possible. I spoke to one gentleman. I hate having to talk about all these clandestine sources, but like the X-Files. But I did speak to a gentleman who said to me that this issue comes up every few years, every 5 years, where it's discussed. Like, do we talk about this? Do we tell the world about this? So it is something that matters. And I do believe that there are factions. All ruling elites have factions. Go back 2,000 years, Caesar and Pompey, they were factions. No one agrees at the top of the pinnacle of power. And I think this is the case with the UFO secret keepers. So, yes, I believe that there are those who want the secret out. They think people shouldn't have to be spoon-fed BS for their whole lives. There are people who believe that. The problem is that they don't all agree. Are the movies, is Hollywood a conduit for this? And I have to be honest with you and tell you, I don't know what I think on this. I've gone back and forth about it. I guess I would say maybe, but often I feel that that's a little overblown. I mean, I know people now who do Hollywood production, and I mean, the impression I get is they just want to make money. They want, and UFOs and aliens, I mean, the public loves that. And so there's more than enough motivation for them to make these types of movies. The question, I guess, is, does the CIA or other agencies, do they influence the message? And I guess I would say the answer is very possibly. I mean, the Robertson panel in 1952, 1953, CIA sponsored, did say, let's work with major media to manage this topic. So there are relationships there. It's about the best I can give you right now.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, Richard Dolan. Thanks very much.
Thank you.